Hello, my name is Jim Bennett. I'm the director of the National Center for Religious Freedom Education here at RFI. And I'm grateful to be joined today by Lauren Carpita. Lauren actually just participated in one of our student programs, and so we're excited to sort of hear about that, as well as find out a little bit more about her. So Lauren, welcome.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. I'm at Baylor University studying political science, philosophy, and child and family studies. Grew up in Seattle for most of my life up until middle of high school during COVID. Our family relocated to Arizona and have since been in Texas at Baylor. And that's a huge part of my passion for religious freedom. In Seattle, God was not to be discussed. Religion was not to be discussed. That was a private matter. And my family isn't particularly religious, so my exposure to any religious affiliations, backgrounds, theologies was fairly minimal. And I still felt a calling from the Lord. I'm Christian. But it wasn't to be discussed and it wasn't to be exposed. Since moving to Arizona, I had a theology class at a Catholic school that just changed my life. Ended up getting confirmed into the faith spring of my junior year of high school. Family still wasn't religious. But that was ultimately life-changing for me. And seeing the human flourishing present in that religious community versus the absence in Seattle was huge. And the work that's being done at the Religious Freedom Institute is incredible. I'm excited.
Well, we sure enjoyed having you in our program yesterday. It's interesting you mentioned something like Baylor. In a place like Baylor, obviously there's some faith connections, right, and there's an emphasis there, and probably a sizable percentage of the student body has interest in sort of faith-based things.
Right.
So, you experience coming from Seattle and now to this atmosphere. What do you notice in a place where people are free to express sort of their faith perspective? How is that different?
It's different on many levels. I know something we discussed yesterday was the human flourishing that's present when you have freedom of religion. I would say intellectually, you have the space to have the dialogue between atheists, agnostics, people of other faiths, and essentially my classes have been very Socratic, 10 to 15 kids just in a circle, you're talking the entire time, and essentially what you're doing, philosophy or otherwise, is deconstructing what you believe and then building it from the ground up, except you're having different perspectives come in and you're constantly challenging what you believe, why you believe it, going to different texts, different sources. And so at Baylor, I think I've never experienced a community as embracing of freedom of expression and as open, where you had that civil discourse.
Now, do you have any friends from high school or from childhood who are at other universities or institutions? Are they experiencing similar things? Do they experience hostility? What's your sense as to what your peers are experiencing out there right now?
I have friends all over. Primarily state schools, you are not to speak about God, especially not written. So in papers, I've had friends who were top 10% of our class, and they're getting graded down on papers for when they talk about Jesus, about God, about their religious beliefs, their religious convictions. In sorority or Greek life, you're not allowed to speak about it. It's not to be mentioned. In certain clubs, it's not to be mentioned. So really, you don't have religious freedom, I would argue, in the sense that you can express those ultimate truths.
Yeah. So yesterday we talked about religious freedom really insists that everyone has the ability to explore life's ultimate questions, to embrace what their conscience suggests is true, and then to express it in both private and public life. And the private part is not particularly controversial in this country. Of course it is in perhaps other parts of the world. How do we get past sort of this hostility that you're describing, even for your peers, your age group? Because as we've talked about, religious freedom makes space for differences. Mm-hmm. It doesn't affirm all the differences, but it makes space for the differences and affirms everyone's human dignity. I have to think that's a message that the vast majority of 20, 22-year-olds would embrace. Why are they not understanding what religious freedom is, and how can we change that?
Jim, I think a lot of it comes down to fear. And that fear is spread widely in the media. So I think freedom of expression on social media and essays, there need to be harsher protections for that religious expression, whether it be written or oral, especially in academic settings. Academia has largely diverted from being able to have those conversations. So I think a lot of it has to do with harsher protections and that fear of, I guess I'll back up. So there's a fear that faith will infringe on your personal rights, or you feel that somebody's faith is being forced onto you. And so there's a fear that you will have to change what you do and what you believe because I believe something. And so I think once we have that discourse and have those protections in place where you can have that dialogue, we'll push through the fear. Because you can't really get around it, you can't go over, you can't go under, you just have to push through and show that you're not trying to change a belief, you're not trying to force anything on anybody, but it is also your right to express that. And I think a lot of that comes from atheists, and I think that atheism is a faith statement in and of itself, where you're saying there is no God, and that is still a belief statement because you don't know for sure. And so I think I would argue that the atheists forcing religious suppression would be them forcing their religious beliefs on me. And so you're protecting both the atheist and the religious in all aspects.
Yeah, well, of course, even regardless of what you deem to be true, what your conscience suggests is truth, it involves some sort of spiritual pursuit. It's an intellectual pursuit. So whether you're arriving at a faith perspective or a non-faith perspective, it really still is protected by religious freedom. And maybe that's part of the message. At RFI, we like to say religious freedom is for everyone, everywhere. And then we try to articulate those principles. So last question for you. So, you mentioned what you're studying there at the university right now. How can you take the principles of religious freedom? I mean, maybe it's a little easier for someone that's maybe pre-law or political science, and they say, well, I'm going to push policies or I'm going to defend this right in the courts. How does someone you actually have a pretty diverse, things that you're studying. How do you integrate religious freedom into that?
I think with that discussion and using your voice, being articulate, advocating for others who cannot advocate for themselves, and pushing past that fear. Within the classroom setting, you can push back a lot, and you can draw, and you can also have the humility to learn about other religions and the importance of freedoms. I think also it's easy to take for granted the religious freedom that we have in this country, because by and large, we are incredibly free and have those opportunities, and the worst that happens is we get some pushback in the workplace or in an academic setting. But from what we've heard at this summit, there are Uyghurs who are having their organs harvested, and there are women being beheaded for expressing their faith. And to me, that has been incredibly inspiring to know that I have an arena where I can advocate and I can speak freely despite any sort of relatively minor pushback, because there are people that are giving their lives for their faith and giving their lives for religious freedom. So I think spreading that even. So maybe not spreading my religious beliefs, but saying, hey, this is what's going on across the world. And it may be far geographically, but it's not, because crimes against humanity start really small and they can grow.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just spreading the awareness, is an important part of this process. I mean, one thing I've learned having just met you, fairly recently and going through our program, is that you also seem committed to sort of a charitable approach to all of this. And, you mentioned rights, and you really can't separate rights from responsibilities or duties. They're sort of two sides of the same coin. And a part, I think, of the assertion of these rights is this charitable response. It's preserving the dignity of the other who disagrees with you. It's respectfully making these arguments. So I look forward to, in the future, hearing of ways that you've done that, and so grateful you took the time to be with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.